It's a great honor to be here tonight. I don't know what time it is. I'd like to thank the Center of African Studies and all the event sponsors for making it possible for me to be here today. I've done so much in the last month and a half. I've been to several places in a very, very short period of time. Muscat, Oman, Doha, Qatar, Toronto, Canada, Vancouver, Canada, Chicago, United States, and Los Angeles, all in a matter of a few weeks. I've observed and listened and conversed, so I have a lot to say. I usually write in a very structured, balanced way for my talks and for my novels, everything, but what I'm about to say is gonna jump around so much, just bear with me, just hold on and grab what you can. Also, please note that I may say some things that some of you don't like, and that's okay. Just needed to preface it with that. My first published novel was Zara the Windseeker. It was a blend of science fiction and fantasy steeped in Nigerian magic, mysticisms, folklore, and cultures. It was published in 2005 by the publisher Houghton Mifflin and then Kachifo Limited in Nigeria, and it went on to win the 2008 Wole Soyinka Prize for Literature. But here's why I wrote the novel. I'm Nigerian-American. Well, the label that I prefer to use is Nigerian-American. It's more poetic. My parents came to the United States for medical school, my father, and graduate school, my mother, in 1969. They only stayed because the Biafran Civil War was raging and they couldn't return. So I ended up being born in Cincinnati, Ohio, the United States, as opposed to Nigeria. I'm the third child of 4 children. My 2 older sisters, Ife and Ngozi, are 1 and 2 years my senior, and my younger brother, Emezie, is 7 years my junior. In the 80s, my parents started taking my siblings and me to Nigeria to get to know relatives and generally connect with Nigeria and our heritage. Connection, interesting. We'd go about every 2 years or so, and we spent time in Lagos and then traveled to my parents' villages in Aron-Ndiazog, excuse me if I mispronounced that, and Isia Kinesi. Over the years, the worst and the best things in my life, the most terrifying and the most exhilarating, happened in the villages of Igbo land, particularly in my father's village of Aron-Ndiazog. A clear, far from rosy, yet unconditional love for all things Nigerian grew within me from those trips. And when I started writing stories, it was only natural that my muse always flew me across the Atlantic to these places. But I digress. While in Nigeria, especially as I got older, I noticed and watched my female cousins, especially the ones between the ages of 9 and 12. My young male cousins had chores, but they also had time and space to study, play video games, and show my siblings and me around. It was different for my young female cousins, however. When they weren't studying, they were in the kitchen cooking, doing laundry, cleaning, always something. Chores, chores, chores. So in 2001, I returned to the United States from a family trip to Nigeria, and my mind was churning with ideas and forming stories. I was very aware of the stereotypes in the West about the entire continent of Africa. I was just beginning my master's program in literature and forced to read for the millionth time Polish author Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. This was the story that coined the phrase Heart of Darkness for the continent of Africa, further solidifying the Western view of the continent as a primitive, backward place full of primitive, backward people. When I sat down to write, I fought against these ideas and decided to take that stereotype and turn it on its head with a science fictional flair. Oh, Africans are primitive, I thought, animalistic, Close to the earth like monkeys? Okay. The people of this world that I'm going to create are so close to the land that they managed to marry technology and nature, and the result is that they created things far more sophisticated and amazing than anything on Earth. So, in Zara the Windseeker, you have people who look a lot like Nigerians with names like Chukwu, Tolu, and Zara, who have invented cars run by electricity-producing plants, organic computers grown from CPU seeds, and much more. But first and foremost, when I wrote Zara the Windseeker, I was using narrative to fight something quieter than racism, but equally as crippling. When I wrote this story, I wanted to write a novel so engrossing and empowering and entertaining that girls like my chore-burdened female cousins would forsake their chores to hide in a secret spot to read the book. I wanted Nigerian girls to go on adventures of imagination. The exercise of imaginative stretching develops the habit of being creative. And how can one enact change, for example, without first imagining it? I wanted to empower Nigerian girls so they'd grow up to be empowered Nigerian women, and I wanted to do it through narrative. In Zara the Windseeker, the main character, Zara, a shy 13-year-old girl, decides to leave her home and venture 400 miles into the wild and crazy forbidden greeny jungle that grows right outside of her village. Her only companion and weapons were a talking and slightly neurotic compass. I wrote this between 2001 and 2003, and when I look back, I realized I'd written a GPS before I knew what a GPS was. And a defective electronic greeny jungle field guide. Zara goes to secure an object in the care of an insanely violent beast to save her best friend's life. So my novel, Zara the Windseeker, for me was just the beginning. Time and time again, when I sat down to channel stories onto the page, they were about the plight, condition, and dreams of girls and women, most often Nigerian girls and women. I think this is because I was always in conversation with this idea of what it is to be a good Nigerian woman, a good Igbo woman, and why be one. Even earlier than Zara the Windseeker, I wrote a short story called The Palm Tree Bandit. Something my granduncle said one day while we were sitting and watching the sunset in Nigeria sparked the story. I've always had very strong arms, and if I show you my arms, you'd be like, whoa. Here, I'll show you. Strong arms, there, guns. They've always been like that. So I've always had very strong arms, and at the time I was bragging to my granduncle about how awesome I was at climbing trees. My granduncle cocked his head and said, "You know, women aren't supposed to climb palm trees." Then he laughed, because to him it was not just the truth, it was funny. To me, it was irritating. Just as it was irritating that none of my male relatives would answer my questions about masquerade cults. Just as it was irritating how everyone insisted that no woman could ever be the head of household, and so on. I went home and I wrote a story called The Palm Tree Bandit, in which a woman climbs a palm tree to tap palm wine. Her actions cause great outrage in her community, but her actions also give birth to a mythical superheroine and trickster named the Palm Tree Bandit. So I've been in conversation and argument with what it is to be a good Igbo woman for a long time. One of the questions asked of me in a brief interview for this conference's website was, what is my favorite Igbo female figure and why? I sat and thought about it for a bit, and then the answer came to me. It was very clear. My favorite Igbo female figure is my mother, Dr. Nnedi Okorafor. Why? Because despite growing up within a deeply patriarchal Igbo society where the epitome of a woman's success is measured by how many children she births, my mother was valedictorian of her high school class and university classes, one of Nigeria's top athletes in college, I get my strong arms from her. She made the Olympic team in the javelin back in her day, so she had the strong arms too. Went on to become a midwife and a registered nurse and earn her PhD in health administration. In the middle of all that, she married my father, who was also valedictorian of his classes, a nationally known hurdler in Nigeria, and went on to become a cardiovascular surgeon and chief of surgery at one of Chicago's top hospitals. My mother raised 3 infants, my 2 sisters and I, we were all 1 year apart, so all in a row, while finishing her PhD. So whenever I'd complain about my PhD, when I was earning mine, there's nothing that I could say to get sympathy from her. Absolutely nothing. My mother showed me by example how to be magnificent. This was a lot to live up to. My mother hit all the points of what it is to be a good Igbo woman by my definition. She was fertile, having 4 children. She married well. She had a son, though 3 girls came before him, and all in a row. Oh my gosh. She was beautiful. She was educated, and it didn't hurt that she was also athletic and very well spoken. So my mother was always the epitome of the Igbo woman to me. And I knew I could never live up to that example. I knew that I could never live up to the example she set, not just because my mother was and is amazing, but also because I was myself. How could I be a proper Igbo woman when I can't speak Igbo? Gasp. Mind you, I tried. I spent years trying to learn. And this is one of the reasons why when I was invited to this conference, I knew I wanted to put this in this speech, because I need to explain. So often anyway, okay, let me just read what I have here. I spent years trying to learn. Whenever I'd go to Nigeria with my family, I'd try to speak it. I wanted to speak it. I liked the sound of it. And when my Americanized tongue would mispronounce the words, people would laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh. In the village, children would follow me around and laugh. You all know what I'm talking about. They found my accent so hilarious. They made me say Christmas over and over again. Say Christmas, say Christmas, Christmas. Oh. My aunts and uncles wouldn't correct my pronunciation. They'd laugh. My cousins would laugh. Their friends would laugh. I was already very self-conscious about knowing so little of all things Igbo because I was American. So, over time, I grew quiet. Then I stopped trying. Then, of course, Igbos would call me incomplete. I love that word, incomplete. That's such a nice thing to say to somebody. They would call me incomplete because I didn't speak Igbo. Then they'd say I wasn't a real Igbo woman. And they'd look at me perplexed and ask, why can't you speak it? Don't you want to speak it? You're so westernized. No, that's not how it happened. How could I be a proper Igbo woman when I never dreamed of getting married? I never dreamed of having children. Oh, I was ecstatic when others got married or had children. I love seeing people happy. But these were never my goals, definitions of happiness, or interests. I'd wonder why this was seen as wrong or un-Igbo and improper when it was just naturally how I was. I was constantly reminded of what I was supposed to be like by elders, uncles, aunts, grandparents, just people in general. Everyone has an opinion. Many Igbo traditions were wonderful and gave me a sense of pride and foundation, but some, I'd listen, I wouldn't argue, but inside, I'd quietly glower at the rigidity. Not only did many of the traditional ideals of Igbo women not suit me, but they annoyed me. But to be Igbo is blood, right? To be Igbo is to be Igbo, correct? These conflicts swirled in my subconscious for decades, well before I started writing. I was resisting and questioning and dialoguing with them, even when I was a child getting chased down the street by masquerades during Christmas time, or frowning at my cousins who laughed and laughed at me when I tried and failed to speak Igbo, or while I quietly ate the kola nut finally offered to me. So when I sat down to write the novel that would become my most known and award-winning novel, a character with great force and rage sprang forth, Onye who fears death. She's a near-complete embodiment of all the fury, the questions, and actions boiling within me. In a post-apocalyptic world, Onye grows up to be a powerful, impulsive sorceress who cannot tolerate injustice, who works the great mystic points, which are merely just the central tenets of Igbo cosmology, who goes on a quest of vengeance that becomes much more. She is a half-breed and very ugly because of it. She's visited by great masquerades, and her teacher, whose name happens to be Aro, the sorcerer, at first refuses to teach her because she is a woman and thus capable of uncontrolled and terrible destruction. And he turns out to be correct. She causes great violence and destruction. So truth and perception and ideals are complex in this book, and right and wrong are not so clear. Within the novel are stories mined from myself, my mother, my aunties, my family, my female cousins. I've always been a great listener. That was one of the few hints of being a writer that I had, because I started writing when I was 19, or actually 20. I didn't write anything creative before that, but I've always liked to listen to people. I find people very interesting, but when I sat down to write this novel, their and my stories came forth in a unique, creative way. Over the years, I've set my novels and stories in the future, in worlds of advanced technology, where technology has come to the end of its usefulness, in post-apocalyptic times, in the middle of an alien invasion in Lagos. And the question of who is the African, usually Nigerian, woman who makes a good one, what makes a good one, and where do I fit in, is always at one of the central questions. In my alien invasion in Lagos novel named Lagoon, Adora is a marine biologist whose husband has joined a Mountain of Fire-like cult and is convinced that she is a marine witch. She's got to deal with his paranoia while shape-shifting aliens cause chaos in Lagos. In my forthcoming book, The Book of Phoenix, the core of the story is all about who is the African woman and where does she fit in and what is her future. Science fiction has long been a bridge between the sciences and the arts, one that continues to evolve and reflect the effects of technology, science, and socio-political changes on people and their globalized societies. Science fiction is also where I prefer to discuss and speculate about my cultures. What are the biggest challenges facing the Igbo woman today? That was another question that was asked in my interview, which got me really thinking. I can only speak to my experience, and to that I say the biggest challenge to the Igbo woman today is finding the confidence to pursue her dreams, hopes, and aspirations, even when they go against what is expected of her. Dr. Rose Mezu said something profound to me earlier today. We were talking about why Igbo women have so much trouble gathering to become a powerful force in today's Nigeria. What did I write here? She said that it was because what she was saying is that aside from the effects of colonialism, it was because Igbo women today have too many allegiances to fathers, to husbands, to sons, to brothers, to uncles. In other words, the system is already set up to prevent it. When I was writing the speech days ago, I had an experience that really brought this idea home. During a discussion with a Nigerian male friend of mine, he grew exasperated with me and said that I was too smart for my own good. Because I was too smart, and because of this, no Nigerian man would ever marry me, he said. You ask too many questions, he said. Interesting. Annoyed, I took his words to Twitter. Twitter's a wonderful tool, except when it gets out of control, like when I did this. I took this to Twitter, and this unknowingly started a minor Twitter storm about Nigerians and the roles and rules of gender. I did not anticipate this to happen, but it just did. Soon, several Nigerian men jumped in to add their 2 kobo. Not surprisingly, one of the focal points of the issue was marriage. And there's a reason why it's always marriage, but I'll stay off of that. And when I finish, I'm gonna open it up for questions. So if you have any questions, please ask them. Okay, so the word submission kept coming up in the conversation. It was always about the woman in the relationship submitting to the man, never the other way around. Only men said this. Well, unless you include the woman who called me defective for questioning the very idea of submission. She was crazy. This woman also had insisted, in all caps, of course, that a woman's place was wherever her husband went. Anyway, so mainly men believed a happy marriage called for the submission of the woman. Other men were more polite, and they said, oh, no, it's not about submission as much as it is about a woman respecting her man. Which sounded an awful like respect being synonymous with submission to me. Rules, rigid rules. There were lots of only one person can pilot the ship references. And of course, the pilot could only be the man, for the man is the head of the household. That phrase, head of the household, still comes up too. It was like a mantra, said over and over and over again. No reason, just that it was, is, and always will be how things are, because. This discussion made me try to think of, okay, what's my idea of marriage? And it took me about a day or two to come up with something. So my idea of marriage is more like, I don't know if anyone has seen this movie, but more like the Jaeger in the science fiction film Pacific Rim. Has anyone seen that? Yeah. It's one of my favorite movies, so maybe that's why. A Jaeger is a giant humanoid robot used to fight kaiju. And kaiju are basically giant monsters. Think Godzilla, giant lizard. Each Jaeger is piloted by 2 pilots whose brains are linked, called drifting, to share the mental load of operating the machine. This is my idea. This is my idea of an ideal marriage. For me, at least. I can't speak for others. We are all different. It seems a far greater and more efficient use of each person's talents and energy than the hierarchical metaphor of captain and subordinate. But like the science fictional Jaeger, my idea of marriage doesn't exist yet, but it might in the future, or it might not. I'll see. Regardless, one thing to bear in mind is that that Igbo culture is not set in stone. It's not static. It's alive, fluid, adaptive, and shifting, while its soul remains what it is. Long ago, Igbo sacrificed human beings to their gods. That has changed, hasn't it? So culture can change. The human body regenerates every 7 to 10 years, yet we remain ourselves, right? The same concept works for Igbo culture. There is room for change and growth within Igbo culture. There are aspects of it that need to fall away like dead skin, And there is room for variety, or there should be room for variety, and there should be room for change, there should be room to share and grow. These are my visions of the future, at least. But I'm only imagining things. I tend to do that. Thank you.